We're going to get straight on to the big story of the day. The families of the three Nottingham stabbing victims, Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley-Coomer and Ian Coates, have criticised the mental health services who dealt with killer Veldo Colconi in the lead up to the attacks, saying they had blood on their hands.
That's after a new review found an NHS trust identified missed opportunities to deal with Colconi's psychosis. He had been sectioned no less than 4 times. We're joined now by Radd Seiger, who's a spokesperson for the victim's family. Radd, morning to you. It's appalling and tragic for these families to have lost their loved ones in the most cruel and terrible circumstances. But then to read this report, this man should not have been on the loose. He should have been sectioned and medicated.
Andrew, Don, good morning. Andrew, you're absolutely spot on. Our lovely Ian, Barney and Grace should still be alive today, and that man should never have been on the streets. And I'm doing the best to support the families as best I can to get justice and accountability. But where on earth, as human beings, do you go when your loved ones have been destroyed in this manner, Andrew?
Can you just, I mean, obviously, a lot of people out here are angry, but for the family in particular, the fact that there have been so many failures, systemic failures, both in the NHS, in the care, and also in the police. I mean, can you just give us a little picture of how the families are feeling this morning? There must be incredibly anger and to be living this pain constantly.
Don, you're absolutely right. So, first things first, they're coping with the most unimaginable loss. But then on top of that, when you learn that the state, the various authorities and organizations who were there to keep these lovely people safe failed, not just on the day, but in the 3 or 4 years in the lead up to it, there were so many opportunities to prevent this tragedy from happening. And all I can say this morning is, having spoken to them, we've obviously known about this for a little while now, but this morning, their blood is boiling. So they're coping with the loss. And now they're faced with, where do you go with that? When you know that your loved one should still be here, I don't know how they're coping with it. And, they're getting counseling, but the best that we can do, and with your wonderful help, is to make sure that these tragedies are, these loved ones have not been lost in vain, and that we can try and do some good going forward, on top of making sure that there's accountability at every level, whether that's with the police, whether that's with the NHS, whether that's with the local council. Everybody here had a part to play. Everybody had an opportunity to keep Colconi off the streets, and they failed. So there's a lot of work still to do. So thank you for asking how they are. I can't even begin to describe the pain that they're going through this morning, Don.
They've been pushing, have they not, for the sentence to be reviewed, because they feel Colconi should have a whole life sentence and be served in a prison, not in a secure hospital. Mm. Does that campaign continue?
It does, Andrew. The families are absolutely certain that Colconi in that moment had mental capacity. He planned it. He was carrying a rucksack full of weapons. He didn't harm other people. So they're convinced that in that moment, he had criminal responsibility for what he did. And together with the family's lawyers, we're gathering as much evidence, documentation together, and to drive this to the public inquiry that we've all heard about this morning, this judge-led inquiry. And if new evidence comes out at that inquiry, which the current government must be commended, because they promised the families this, if new evidence comes out that in fact the courts and the experts in the criminal case got it wrong, then there is an opportunity to have this revisited. The families are utterly convinced that Colconi knew what he was doing. And if he knew what he was doing, then there is criminal culpability, and the lawyers and I are steering them in that direction. It's going to take a little while, Andrew. We must be patient. We must gather everything together, and then hold this post office style inquiry, which we've all been watching. And that's what these families are entitled to. And that's when we will get to the bottom of it all, Andrew. To get that accountability, but for goodness sake, And I know we've all been discussing it this morning. We know the NHS is broken. It's under-resourced. There are not enough people. They're doing far too much work. And these things happen. So let's hope Nottingham, Andrew and Dawn, is that opportunity to have a sea change in approach. And because, we're entitled to send our kids to university. Ian was entitled to go to work that morning and come back safely. And you can tell how emotional I am this morning.
Sure.
I'm just so upset on their behalf.
All right, Radd Seiger speaking for the Nottingham families. Thank you for that. Well, joining us in the studio is the former Labour MP and now Chief Executive of the think tank Labour Together. Jonathan, one of your briefs when you were in the Commons till the last election was the health portfolio, Shadow Health. This is a cataclysmic failure by various bodies. He was sectioned 4 times. He wasn't taking his medication.
I mean, absolutely. But can I just say at the start, I cannot imagine the pain, the anguish, the anger, the upset that the family must be going through to not only have lost their loved ones in the most horrific of circumstances, but to now learn of these deep systematic failures in the system, which had something happened sooner in the system, their loved ones may still be with us today. So it's absolutely right that there's a proper inquiry in this, and I think the Labour government have committed to that, and hopefully we'll have more details of that soon. But it is clear that something has significantly gone wrong here. And it is, I think, about a bigger picture about mental health services in this country. Mental health, improving mental health was always one of my big passions in politics when I was both a health spokesperson for the Labour Party, but also as a politician, something I've campaigned on and will continue to campaign on. And we have problems. People who do not get access to the care that they need when they've got very, very serious mental health problems, which is what the killer had in this instance. But also people with what is sometimes described as lower level mental health issues don't get support. And if you've got a drug or an alcohol problem, and that's something I'm passionate about because my dad had an alcohol problem, you can very rarely get the support either. Our mental health system is broken and it desperately and urgently needs fixing.
The problem with that, Jonathan, is Callaghan was getting treatment. He was being treated, but he was let out of that treatment because of system failure. This isn't to do with funding per se. He was in treatment, and they let him out to commit this horrible crime. I mean, now it's sort of like 3 people have lost their lives because of it. I mean, Labour really do need. I know you're not a serving MP at the moment, but Labour have to do something. Have to do something fast. I mean, how many more people are there out there like this? Well,
when I say access to treatment, I mean that in the broad terms, because as I understand the case. And I might be wrong on this because I've not followed every in and out of the particulars of the case, but for a while he was refusing his medication, and the system failed to deal with him. And now this comes down to something called the Mental Health Act, which is I don't want to get too sort of boring and technical about it. The Mental Health Act is the regime that governs who is sectioned and who isn't sectioned. It does need reform because some of it is really sort of old-fashioned, almost Victorian, actually, in the way some of it operates. The 2 main parties have said it needs reform. The Labour government has said it is going to push ahead with reforming that act. But I think one of the questions and the challenges for the Labour government and my old colleague and friend Wes Streeting is how reform of the Mental Health Act will deal with people who are a danger to society, a danger to themselves, and what the regime is for sectioning.